Her name was Amelia Hayes, a woman etched from the grey monotony of Boston, shipped west like a crate of dry goods. She carried one small carpet bag and a heart full of fragile hope. The advertisement promised a new life in the Montana Territory, a husband, a home. But the man who met her at the Redemption train depot had eyes as cold and unforgiving as the winter sky. He hadn't sent for her. He didn't want her. As the weight of utter rejection threatened to shatter her, a tiny hand slipped into hers, and a small voice, no louder than a sigh, asked the question that would change everything. "Can you be my mummy?" The locomotive hissed and groaned, a great iron beast sighing its last breath as it shuddered to a halt. For 3 days that rhythmic clatter had been Amelia Hayes's only companion, a steel lullaby carrying her away from the crowded, indifferent streets of Boston and into the vast, intimidating emptiness of the American West. She pressed her face against the grimy window, peering out at the town of Redemption, Montana. It wasn't much more than a single dusty street flanked by raw timber buildings, all of it huddled under a sky so immense and blue it made her feel like a forgotten speck. Clutching her worn carpet bag, its floral pattern faded from years of use, she stepped down onto the platform. The air was different here, thin and sharp-scented, with pine and dust and something wild she couldn't name. It stung her lungs and made her feel strangely alive. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage of her own making. She had risked everything on a single hopeful letter from a man named Benjamin Thorne. A widower, the correspondence had stated, with a large ranch and a young daughter in need of a mother's care. The letters, penned in a surprisingly elegant script, spoke of shared values, of building a future of companionship. She smoothed the front of her grey travelling dress, a sensible garment that had seemed perfectly adequate in Boston, but felt drab and flimsy here. She'd practiced her introduction 100 times. "Mr. Thorne, I am Amelia Hayes. I am so pleased to finally make your acquaintance. Simple, respectful." A man detached himself from the shadows of the station overhang. He was tall, broader in the shoulder than she'd imagined, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from the unforgiving landscape around them. Sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He wore a dusty hat, a worn leather vest, and trousers tucked into scuffed boots. He moved with a heavy, deliberate tread, his gaze sweeping over the few disembarking passengers before it landed on her. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of a welcoming smile. "You'll be the woman from the advertisement," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. Amelia's carefully rehearsed greeting died in her throat. She managed a small nod. "I am Miss Amelia Hayes, and you are Mr. Benjamin Thorne." He gave a curt nod in return, his eyes giving her a quick, dismissive appraisal that made her feel plain and foolish. "Get your things." He turned without another word and strode toward a buckboard wagon hitched to a pair of sturdy-looking horses. There was no offer to help with her bag, no inquiry about her journey. A cold dread, heavier than her luggage, began to settle in her stomach. This was not the man from the letters. The man in the letters spoke of gentle hopes. This man was a fortress of grim silence. The ride to the Whispering Pines ranch was conducted in that same unnerving quiet. Amelia sat stiffly on the hard wooden seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She tried a few times to start a conversation, commenting on the stark beauty of the jagged mountains in the distance or the vastness of the plains, but her remarks were met with monosyllabic grunts, or more often, nothing at all. The silence stretched, becoming an entity of its own, thick with unspoken resentment. Why? Why was he so cold? Had she somehow disappointed him already? Was she not what he expected? The familiar spectre of being unwanted, a ghost that had haunted her since her days as an orphan, rose to whisper its cruelties in her ear. The ranch was larger than she had imagined, a sprawling collection of buildings, a sturdy main house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals, all nestled in a valley carved by a winding creek. It was a place of substance of hard work. Yet as they drew closer, she saw signs of neglect. A fence post was leaning precariously, the vegetable garden was overgrown with weeds, and the whitewash on the house was peeling. It was a place that had lost its heart. Benjamin Thorne pulled the wagon to a stop before the main house and finally spoke his voice, flat and hard. "We need to talk." He led her into the house. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of stale wood smoke and something else. Grief! It was a clean house, but it felt unlived in the furniture, shrouded in a layer of stillness. A stern-looking woman with greying hair pulled back in a severe bun emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. Her lips were a thin, disapprotic line. "Genevieve, this is Miss Hayes Thorne," said bluntly. "She'll be leaving on the next stagecoach east." Amelia's breath caught in her chest. Leaving, she echoed her voice, a small, wounded sound. Thorne finally turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, raw frustration. "Miss Hayes, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. I don't know who you've been corresponding with, but it wasn't me. I never wrote you. I never sent for a mail-order bride." The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the fragile new life she had so carefully constructed in her mind. The kind letters, the shared hopes, it was all a lie. A cruel, elaborate lie. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She had travelled 2,000 miles to be a bride to a man who had never asked for her. She was an intruder, a fool. But the letters, she stammered, her hands trembling as she fumbled in her reticule for the small bundle tied with a ribbon. The advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. It listed your name, this ranch. It was a mistake. He bit out his jaw tight. A well-intentioned but misguided effort by my foreman. He thought I needed help. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture rife with agitation. I don't want a wife. I don't want a replacement for—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The ghost of the woman he'd lost filled the room, her presence more powerful than any living person. The older woman, Genevieve, sniffed disdainfully. "My niece Sarah has been gone barely a year. To think a man could replace her so quickly is an insult to her memory." Amelia's face burned. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She wanted to turn and run to flee this house of sorrow and rejection and never look back. She had been so wrong, so naive. There was no place for her here. There was no place for her anywhere. She gathered the last shreds of her dignity. "I see," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I apologize for the intrusion. When does the next stagecoach depart?" 3 days, Thorne answered, his tone unyielding. "There's a storm rolling in from the north. Nothing's moving until it passes. You can stay in the spare room. Genevieve will see to it." It was a dismissal, a prison sentence of 3 days in this house where she was profoundly, painfully unwanted. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of this hard, grieving man and his judgmental kinswoman. She gave a stiff, formal nod, her world collapsing inward. As she stood there, a statue of crushed hope, a small sound came from the doorway leading to a hallway. A little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, stood half hidden behind the doorframe. She had her father's dark hair tied back in a slightly crooked braid and wide, sorrowful eyes the colour of moss. She clutched a worn rag doll to her chest, her thumb tucked in her mouth as she stared at Amelia. She was a miniature portrait of loss. This was Rosalie, the daughter in need of a mother. Benjamin Thorne's expression softened infinitesimally as he saw her. "Rosie, go back to your room." The little girl didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on Amelia, an intense, searching look that seemed to see right through the layers of her disappointment and humiliation, down to the core of her loneliness. Genevieve made a move toward the child, her expression stern. "Rosalie, you heard your father." But the child ignored them both. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. She walked slowly, deliberately across the room, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards, her eyes never leaving Amelia's face. She stopped just a few inches away, so close Amelia could see the faint smattering of freckles across her nose. Amelia's heart ached for this solemn, silent child. She forgot her own pain, her own rejection, and saw only the profound emptiness in the girl's eyes. She knelt unconsciously, bringing herself down to the child's level. Rosalie slowly, timidly reached out a small, hesitant hand. She didn't touch Amelia's dress or her arm. She gently laid her tiny palm against Amelia's cheek. The touch was feather-light a question, and a plea all in one. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the silence in the room, the little girl whispered the words that would anchor Amelia to this place, the words that would become both her reason and her greatest challenge. "Can you be my mommy?" The child's question hung in the air, a fragile, shimmering thing in the heavy silence of the Thorne household. Benjamin froze his face, a mask of conflict. Genevieve let out a small, scandalized gasp, but Amelia heard only the desperate hope in that tiny whisper. In that moment, the sting of Benjamin's rejection faded, replaced by an overwhelming wave of empathy for the little girl who stood before her, offering a piece of her broken heart. Amelia's own heart, so recently bruised, swelled in response. She gave Rosalie a small, tremulous smile, her hand coming up to cover the child's. "Hello, Rosalie," she said softly. "My name is Amelia." Rosalie didn't smile back, but the tension around her sad little mouth seemed to ease. She kept her hand on Amelia's cheek, her thumb gently stroking her skin. It was the most profound welcome Amelia had received since stepping off the train. Benjamin finally found his voice, rough with emotion. "Rosie, that's enough. Go with your Aunt Genevieve." He took a step forward, but Amelia instinctively shifted, putting herself slightly between him and the child, a protective gesture she hadn't even known she was capable of. "Please," she said, looking up at him. "Let her be." Their eyes met over the top of Rosalie's head. For the first time, Amelia saw something other than coldness in his gaze, a flicker of deep, gut-wrenching pain and a sliver of confusion. He was a man adrift in his own grief, and his daughter was his only anchor. He didn't know how to fix her silence, and now a stranger he hadn't asked for had managed to elicit more from her in 30 seconds than he had in months. He hesitated, then gave a stiff, reluctant nod, before turning and leaving the room, the sound of his boots echoing his retreat. Genevieve Croft, however, was not so easily deterred. She marched forward and firmly took Rosalie's arm. "Come along, child. You're bothering the guest." The word guest was laced with ice. Rosalie's hand fell from Amelia's cheek, but her eyes remained locked on Amelia's as Genevieve led her away. The silent plea in them was unmistakable. "Don't go." The next 3 days promised to be an eternity. Genevieve showed Amelia to a small, starkly furnished room at the back of the house. It was clean, but utterly devoid of personality. a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small washstand, and a single window that looked out onto a wind-swept patch of prairie. It felt like a cell. Meals are at sun-up noon, and sundown, Genevieve stated, her arms crossed over her chest. You will take them in the kitchen. Benjamin prefers to eat alone. It was another clear message: you are not family. You are not even a guest. You are a temporary problem to be managed. Amelia spent the first day in a haze of misery, staying in her room, unpacking and repacking her meager belongings. The house was a shrine to a memory. Every surface seemed to hold a ghostly imprint of the woman who had come before. Through the thin walls she could hear the rhythms of the household, Genevieve's sharp, commanding tones, Benjamin's heavy, weary footsteps, and a profound, unsettling lack of laughter or lightness. The only sound from Rosalie was an occasional mournful whimper. The promised storm arrived that evening, not with a bang, but with a low, moaning wind that crept through the cracks in the walls, and a steady, chilling rain that turned the world outside into a grey blur. It was a perfect reflection of the gloom inside the house. On the second day, unable to bear the confines of her room any longer, Amelia ventured into the main living space. It was dominated by a large stone fireplace, the mantelpiece crowded with small feminine trinkets, a porcelain bird, a silver-backed hairbrush, a framed photograph of a smiling, beautiful woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Sarah. Amelia felt a fresh pang of inadequacy. This was the woman Benjamin Thorne mourned. She was radiant, full of life. How could a plain, quiet woman like Amelia ever be anything but a pale shadow in comparison? She was the heart of this place. Genevieve's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. The older woman stood in the doorway, her expression one of grim satisfaction at Amelia's discomfort. She built this home with her own 2 hands, right alongside Benjamin. She could ride as well as any man rope a calf and still set a table fit for a governor. There's not a woman in this territory who could measure up to my Sarah. The implication was clear, and certainly not you. She must have been a wonderful person, Amelia said quietly, her voice sincere. Genevieve's harsh expression softened for a fraction of a second. She said, her voice cracking slightly, and this fever took her in less than a week, left this whole house empty, left that poor child without a mother. She looked toward the hallway where Rosalie's room was. The girl hasn't spoken more than a handful of words since the funeral. The doctor says it's the grief. It's stolen her voice. A new understanding dawned on Amelia. Rosalie's whispered question hadn't just been a child's fancy. It was a desperate attempt to break through a wall of silence that had been built around her for a year. Driven by a sudden resolve, Amelia sought out the little girl. She found her in her room, a small, cheerless space with a single window that looked out at the weeping sky. Rosalie was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at her rag doll. Amelia didn't say anything at first. She simply entered the room and sat on the floor a few feet away, taking a small, cloth-bound book of fairy tales from her apron pocket. She opened it and began to read aloud, her voice soft and steady. She read the story of Cinderella, of a lonely girl finding her place in the world. Rosalie didn't look up, but Amelia noticed her small body had gone still, her head cocked as if listening. When Amelia finished the story, she closed the book. The silence returned, but it felt different now, less empty, more expectant. She did the same, after the midday meal this time, reading a story about a brave princess who saves her own kingdom. Midway through, Rosalie slowly crawled across the floor and sat beside her, leaning her small head against Amelia's arm. The warmth and weight of the child was a startling, powerful comfort. When the story was over, Rosalie pointed a small finger at a picture of a castle. "Pretty," she whispered. It was just one word, but to Amelia it sounded like a symphony. She smiled her first genuine smile since arriving. "Yes, it is very pretty." That evening, as the storm raged outside, a crisis erupted. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, came running to the house, soaked to the skin and pale with worry. A section of the creek bank, weakened by the relentless rain, had collapsed, and a newborn calf had been trapped in the mud and rising water. Benjamin and his foreman, Henry Peterson, had managed to pull it free, but the animal was weak and shivering, its breathing shallow. Amelia followed the commotion to the kitchen, where Benjamin was trying to rub the calf dry with rough burlap sacks. His face was a thundercloud of frustration. "It's no good. He's too cold. We're going to lose him." "We could try warming some milk with a little molasses," Genevieve suggested, wringing her hands. Amelia watched the poor creature's struggles, its tiny body trembling violently. She remembered something from her childhood. Her father, a man of letters, had a close friend who was a veterinarian, and she had spent many hours in his study reading his books. "Do you have any cayenne pepper?" she asked suddenly. Benjamin looked up, his expression annoyed. "What in God's name for? We're not seasoning him for supper, Miss Hayes. It stimulates the blood," she said, her voice gaining a confidence that surprised even herself. "And a little ginger, if you have it. It warms from the inside. Mix a pinch of each into the warm milk. It might help bring his body temperature up." Genevieve scoffed. Nonsense. Old wives' tales. But Henry the foreman, a wiry older man with kind eyes, who had watched the entire exchange with a guilty conscience, looked at Amelia with interest. "The boy's right, Ben. We're losing him anyway." "What's the harm in trying?" Benjamin hesitated, his gaze fixed on the shivering calf. He was a practical man, a man who believed in what he could see and touch. But he was also a desperate one. He gave a sharp, reluctant nod. "Fine. Do it." Amelia moved with purpose, her earlier timidity forgotten. She found the spices in Genevieve's well-stocked pantry and carefully mixed a small amount into the warmed milk. She helped Benjamin coax the calf's mouth open, gently pouring the mixture down its throat. They waited. For 10 long minutes, the only sounds were the howling wind, the drumming rain, and the calf's ragged breaths. Then slowly, miraculously, the trembling began to subside. A half-hour later, the calf let out a weak bleat and tried to struggle to its feet. A collective sigh of relief filled the kitchen. Henry grinned at Amelia. "Well, I'll be. You were right, miss." Benjamin didn't say anything, but he looked at Amelia, and this time the coldness in his eyes was replaced by a grudging respect. He had been ready to write off the calf, and she had saved it. He saw not just a mail-order bride, a problem he had to deal with, but a woman of unexpected knowledge and quiet competence. Later that night, as Amelia prepared for bed, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Rosalie, dressed in a long white nightgown, her rag doll clutched in her arms. She stood in the doorway, her expression solemn. "Is the baby cow okay?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes, he's going to be just fine," Amelia assured her with a smile. Rosalie took a few steps into the room and held out her doll. "Her name is Sarah," she whispered. Amelia's heart clenched. The child had named her doll after her mother. "She's a beautiful doll, Rosalie." The little girl looked down at her bare feet, then back up at Amelia, her mossy green eyes full of a question that went far beyond the fate of a calf. It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time it felt different. More real. More possible. "Will you stay?" Rosalie whispered. "Will you be my mummy for real?" Before Amelia could answer, before she could explain the complexities of her situation, that her father didn't want her, that she was meant to leave in a day. The little girl climbed onto the bed, curled up beside Amelia's pillow, and fell asleep, her small hand clutching a fold of Amelia's dress. Amelia sat there in the lamplight, the weight of the sleeping child beside her, a warm, solid presence in the cold, lonely room. Leaving had seemed like the only option. But now, with a motherless child asleep in her bed, and the flicker of a hard-won respect from a grieving husband staying suddenly felt like the only thing she could possibly do. A truce had been struck not with words, but with a saved life and a whispered plea. And for the first time, the house felt less like a prison and more like a place worth fighting for. The storm broke the morning the stagecoach was due to leave. Sunlight, bright and clear, streamed through the windows, making the damp world outside glitter. The air was washed clean, and the sky was once again a vast, achingly blue canvas. It was a day for departures, for new beginnings, and Amelia Hayes was supposed to be on her way. She stood on the porch, her carpetbag at her feet, her heart a tangled knot of duty and desire. Benjamin Thorne stood a few feet away, his back to her, staring out at the mountains. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. The events of the past 2 days, the saved calf, Rosalie's attachment, had shifted the ground beneath them. He was no longer just the man who had rejected her. He was the father of the little girl who had claimed a piece of her soul. The roads will be a muddy mess, but the coach will get through, he said finally, not turning around. His voice was flat, stating a fact. I know, Amelia replied, her own voice, quiet. He turned, then his stormy eyes searching her face. Rosalie is attached to you. It will be hard on her when you leave. It wasn't an invitation to stay. It was another statement of fact, but Amelia heard the undercurrent of conflict. He was a man trapped between honoring the memory of his dead wife and meeting the needs of his living daughter. Perhaps Amelia said, choosing her words carefully, it would be less of a shock to her if my departure wasn't so abrupt, if I stayed just a little longer. To ease the transition. It was a gamble, a desperate plea, disguised as a practical suggestion. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. He looked from Amelia to the front door, as if he could see his silent, sad daughter on the other side. The thought of plunging Rosalie back into that profound quiet after she had taken such a tentative step out of it was clearly a torment to him. 1 month, he said, his voice rough. You can stay for 1 month, as a governess for Rosalie. I'll pay you a fair wage. After that, you'll take the stage back east with enough money to start over. It wasn't the proposal she had dreamed of, not by a long shot. A governess, a temporary employee. But it was something. It was a foothold. It was a chance. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, she said, relief making her voice tremble slightly. I accept. A new fragile arrangement was settled. Amelia was no longer the unwanted bride, but she wasn't the lady of the house either. She was a paid companion, an outsider with a temporary pass to the inner sanctum of their grief. Genevieve Croft made her disapproval plain. She watched Amelia with narrowed, suspicious eyes, her lips permanently pursed. Every meal Amelia took with Rosalie in the kitchen, every story she read, was met with a silent, stony judgment. To Genevieve, Amelia was an interloper, a common hired girl who had somehow tricked her way into the family's orbit. But with Rosalie, Amelia found her purpose. The little girl blossomed under her gentle attention. They spent their days in the small, neglected vegetable garden, Amelia teaching her the names of the plants as they pulled weeds side by side. They took long walks along the creek collecting smooth, flat stones. And every afternoon they had their reading lessons, Rosalie, who had shown no interest in letters before, proved to be a quick and eager student. Words began to flow from her more easily, first in whispers, then in full sentences. The house, once so oppressively silent, began to fill with the sound of a child's chatter. Amelia saw the effect it had on Benjamin. He would watch them from a distance from the barn doorway or the edge of the porch, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, when Rosalie would laugh a bright, tinkling sound that had been absent for a year, Amelia would see a flicker of something that looked like gratitude in his eyes. But just as quickly, it would be replaced by a shadow of pain, and he would turn away, retreating back into his work and his solitude. He never spoke of Sarah, but the woman's presence was everywhere. Her perfectly stitched samplers hung on the walls. Her favorite teacup sat on the mantelpiece. Genevieve made sure of it, often telling Rosalie stories of her true mother, tales of a perfect woman, beautiful and fearless. The stories were always told in Amelia's presence, each one a subtle but sharp reminder of her place. Amelia was the temporary caregiver. Sarah was the sainted, irreplaceable mother. One afternoon, while cleaning out a small storage closet, Amelia came across a leather-bound trunk. Inside, nestled among linens that smelled of lavender, were Sarah's things. A beautiful dress of blue silk, a pair of delicate dancing slippers, and a small leather-bound journal. Amelia knew she shouldn't, but her curiosity was too strong. She opened the journal. The script was bold and flowing, full of life, just as she'd imagined. It was filled with entries about the ranch, her love for Benjamin, her hopes for their future, and her boundless joy over the birth of Rosalie. Ben worries too much, one entry read. He sees danger in every shadow, a drought in every cloudless sky. I tell him his heart is too big for his own good, that he carries the weight of the world on those broad shoulders. It is why I love him. He is my rock, my steady North Star. Reading the intimate words felt like a violation, yet it also gave Amelia a deeper understanding of the man who kept her at such a distance. He wasn't just grieving. He was a man who felt responsible for everything and everyone, and he had been unable to save the person he loved most. Closing the journal, Amelia felt a profound sense of sadness, not just for Benjamin, but for the vibrant woman whose life had been cut so tragically short. The whispers of the past were not confined to the Thorne household. Trouble was brewing from the outside. A neighboring rancher, a man named Bartholomew Bart Corbin, was becoming a problem. Corbin was a large, brutish man with a reputation for greed. His ranch, the Circle C, bordered the Whispering Pines to the east, and according to the hushed, angry conversations Amelia sometimes overheard between Benjamin and his foreman Henry Corbin, was deliberately letting his cattle graze on Thorne land and had dammed up a small tributary that fed into their main creek. One evening, the tension escalated. Benjamin rode in late, his face dark as a storm cloud. His prize stallion Titan was limping badly, a nasty gash on its foreleg. It was wire, he snarled to Henry, his voice tight with fury. Corbin's men strung it across the trail, low down in the shadows. It was meant to cripple him. Amelia, drawn by the commotion, watched from the kitchen doorway as Benjamin and Henry examined the horse. The gash was deep and dirty. "We'll have to put him down," Henry said, his voice heavy with regret. "That leg won't ever heal right, and the infection will set in." "No." Benjamin said, his voice a low growl of defiance. "I'm not losing him." Amelia stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Let me look at it." Both men turned to stare at her. "This ain't a calf with a chill, Miss Hayes," Benjamin said dismissively. "I know," she replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "But I also know that a poultice of yarrow can help stop the bleeding, and boiled willow bark tea can fight the inflammation and the fever that will come." please. Let me try." She saw the doubt warring with desperation on Benjamin's face. He looked at his magnificent horse, his pride and joy, and then at this quiet, determined woman who had already surprised him once. "Get her what she needs," he said to Henry, his voice clipped. For the next 2 hours Amelia worked tirelessly. She gently cleaned the wound, applied a thick, pungent poultice, and bandaged it tightly with clean strips of linen. She brewed the willow bark tea and patiently coaxed the horse into drinking it. Benjamin stood by the entire time, watching her every move, his silence, a heavy presence in the lantern-lit barn. He saw the confidence in her hands, the deep well of knowledge she drew from. She wasn't just playing the part of a governess. She was a woman of substance, of hidden depths. When she was finally done, she straightened up her back, aching. "Now we wait," she said softly. They stood together in the quiet of the barn, the scent of hay and herbal remedies hanging in the air. "Where did you learn all this?" Benjamin asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "My father was a scholar," she explained. "His passion was botany and old remedies. I spent more time reading his books than I did playing with dolls." He nodded, absorbing this new piece of information about her. "Henry told me. He told me he was the one who wrote to you. He saw how much Rosalie was struggling, how much I—" He trailed off. "He overstepped his bounds. He was trying to help Amelia," said gently. I was angry Benjamin admitted, his gaze fixed on the injured horse, angry that he thought anyone could fill Sarah's shoes. "No one can. I'm not trying to," Amelia said, her voice barely a whisper. "I could never be her. I only want to help Rosalie. And you." He finally looked at her, his stormy eyes holding hers in the dim light. The barriers between them, so high and so solid, seemed to tremble. He saw not an intruder or a replacement, but a woman who had quietly and competently saved 2 of his most precious assets, his prize stallion and his daughter's voice. A fragile seed of trust, planted in a field of grief and misunderstanding, was beginning to take root. The days following the stallion's injury settled into a new tentative rhythm. Titan against all odds began to heal. The swelling in his leg went down, and the gash kept clean and treated with Amelia's herbal remedies showed no sign of infection. Each morning, Amelia would tend to the horse, and often Benjamin would be there, a silent observer. He spoke little, but his presence was a quiet acknowledgement of her skill. A wordless thank you. This small victory, however, only seemed to sharpen Genevieve Croft's resentment. The woman saw the fragile bridge forming between Amelia and Benjamin, and she seemed determined to tear it down stone by stone. Her weapon of choice was memory, and she wielded it with surgical precision. Sarah would have known just what to do for that horse, she'd remark at breakfast, her gaze fixed pointedly on Amelia. She had a way with animals. They trusted her. Or when watching Amelia help Rosalie with a sewing lesson, she would sigh dramatically. Sarah's stitches were so fine they were nearly invisible. She made Rosalie's christening gown from a bolt of Irish linen. A true work of art. Each comment was a carefully aimed dart designed to remind Amelia of her own inadequacies. She was not as beautiful, not as skilled, not as beloved. She was a pale imitation, a placeholder. The whispers of the past, once a source of understanding, now became a chorus of doubt in Amelia's mind. She found herself constantly comparing herself to the ghost of the perfect Sarah Thorne, and in every comparison she fell short. Her confidence, so newly won, began to fray. She started to second-guess herself. Was she being foolish to hope for more than a month's employment? Benjamin's gratitude over the horse hadn't translated into any real warmth. He remained distant, polite, but guarded. Perhaps Genevieve was right. Perhaps she was only a temporary fix for his problems, a convenience to be discarded when her usefulness ran out. The external threat from Bart Corbin continued to loom. His men grew bolder, driving a small herd of Thorne cattle into a boggy marsh where 2 were lost. It was a clear act of provocation. Benjamin rode into town to speak with the sheriff, a portly, ineffectual man named Walter Higgins, but returned with his jaw set in a grim line. Corbin claims they wandered. Benjamin reported to Henry, his voice dripping with disgust. And Higgins says without a witness there's nothing he can do. He's in Corbin's pocket, that's the truth of it. The ranch was being squeezed. Between the rustling and the diverted creek, the financial strain was beginning to show. Amelia saw the worry etched on Benjamin's face, the long hours he spent poring over ledgers at the kitchen table late at night. She longed to offer some comfort, to tell him that she understood, but the chasm between employer and employee, between grieving husband and unwanted bride, felt too wide to cross. One night the simmering conflict with Corbin boiled over. A shout from one of the ranch hands woke the house. Amelia rushed to her window and saw a horrifying sight, an orange glow illuminating the darkness. The hay barn was on fire. Chaos erupted. Benjamin Henry and the other hands raced to fight the blaze, their figures silhouetted against the roaring flames. It was a desperate, hopeless battle. The barn, filled with dry hay, was an inferno. Their efforts quickly turned from saving the structure to preventing the fire from spreading to the other buildings, especially the main house. Amelia's first thought was of Rosalie. She ran to the little girl's room to find her awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "It's all right, sweet girl," Amelia soothed, gathering her into her arms. "Your papa is taking care of it. We're safe." She carried Rosalie to the kitchen, away from the windows that faced the fire. Genevieve was already there, pacing and muttering prayers, her face pale. The air was thick with the smell of smoke. The fire raged for over an hour before the men finally got it under control. The barn was a total loss, a blackened, skeletal ruin smouldering against the night sky. The men trooped back toward the house, exhausted, their faces smudged with soot, their shoulders slumped in defeat. As they entered the kitchen, Henry stumbled, crying out in pain. In the melee he had taken a bad burn on his forearm from a falling, flaming timber. "It's nothing," he grunted, but his face was white with pain. While Benjamin and Genevieve hovered uselessly, Amelia moved into action. "Sit him down," she commanded, her voice cutting through the smoky haze. She sent Rosalie for the burn salve. She kept a mixture of aloe and comfrey root and fetched cool water and clean cloths. She worked with a quiet, focused intensity, gently cleaning the wound and applying the soothing salve. Benjamin watched her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and awe. In the midst of chaos and loss, she was a beacon of calm competence. She was not panicked. She was not hysterical. She was a healer. After Henry was bandaged and given a shot of whiskey for the pain, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a heavy sense of despair. The loss of the barn and the winter hay was a devastating blow. "It was Corbin Benjamin," said his voice, a low, dangerous growl. "This was his doing." He slammed his fist on the kitchen table, making the tin cups jump. Rosalie, who had been watching from the corner, began to cry, frightened by her father's anger and the night's terrible events. Amelia immediately went to her, scooping her up and holding her close, murmuring soft, comforting words. Benjamin watched the easy way. Amelia soothed his daughter, the natural maternal way she held her. He looked at the smouldering ruins of his barn at his injured foreman being cared for, at his crying child being comforted, and in that moment something inside him finally broke. The wall he had so carefully constructed around his heart, built from the bricks of grief and guilt, began to crumble. Later, after Rosalie was settled back in bed and Henry was resting, Amelia found Benjamin on the porch, staring at the ruin of his barn. The anger had drained out of him, replaced by a profound weariness that seemed to settle in his bones. "We're ruined," he said, his voice hollow. "That was all the feed for the winter. I'll have to sell off half the herd just to survive." Amelia came to stand beside him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill night air. "You'll rebuild," she said softly. "You're a strong man, Benjamin Thorne." He turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. He saw not the plain woman from Boston, not the governess, but the woman who had saved his horse, who had coaxed his daughter from her silence, who had calmly tended to his friend's wound while his world burned. "I was wrong about you, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so sunk in my own misery, I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You've done nothing but good for this family. Since the moment you arrived, I just did what anyone would do," she whispered, her heart fluttering at his words. "No," he insisted, taking a hesitant step closer. "Sarah, she was the light of this place. When she died, the light went out. I thought it was gone forever. But you've brought a different kind of light. A quiet strength, a steady flame in the dark." He reached out his calloused fingers, gently touching her cheek, mirroring the gesture Rosalie had made on that first day. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through her. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of a deeper, more profound connection. It was an apology, a thank you, and a promise of something more, all in one. In the faint light of the pre-dawn sky, surrounded by the wreckage of his ranch, Benjamin Thorne finally saw Amelia Hayes not as a replacement for the past, but as a glimmer of hope for the future. The seeds of doubt so carefully planted by Genevieve were washed away by a wave of unexpected tenderness, and in their place a fragile but determined shoot of love began to break through the hard, unforgiving soil. The fragile hope born after the fire was immediately tested by nature's fury. A true Montana blizzard descended without warning, a howling wolf of wind and snow that entombed the ranch in a world of white, cutting them off from all help. Inside the house, a different, more terrifying storm was brewing. Rosalie developed a cough that soon deepened into a ragged barking sound, and a fever set in hot and relentless. For Benjamin, it was a waking nightmare. He stood frozen in the doorway of his daughter's room, recognizing the same aggressive illness that had stolen Sarah from him a year before. The same labored breathing, the same dangerous flush. "It's the same," he whispered, his voice hoarse with a crushing, helpless panic. Genevieve Croft, her usual sternness shattered, collapsed in tears. "It's a curse," she sobbed. "It's come back for her." But Amelia refused to surrender to the despair that paralyzed them. "It is not a curse," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that cut through their fear. "It is a fever, and we will fight it." She took command of the sick room, her mind sharp and clear, drawing on every scrap of knowledge from her father's old medical books. She brewed a potent tea of elderflower and peppermint to induce a sweat and bring down the fever. She gently coaxed the hot liquid spoonful by spoonful between Rosalie's lips. She then created a warming poultice of mullein leaves and mustard powder, spreading it on a cloth over the child's congested chest to help her breathe. For 2 days and 2 nights, as the blizzard howled outside, Amelia fought for Rosalie's life. She did not sleep, staying by the child's bedside in a constant, vigilant watch. Benjamin became her silent shadow. His initial helplessness was replaced by a growing awe as he watched her quiet competence, her unbreakable strength. The walls he had so carefully built around his heart began to dissolve in the face of her fierce devotion. On the third night, the crisis reached its peak. Rosalie became delirious, thrashing in the bed and crying out in a small, heart-breaking voice. "Mama, Mama, it's so cold." Benjamin rushed to her side, his face a mask of despair. But Amelia, though trembling with exhaustion, simply began sponging the child's burning skin with cool water. "It's all right, Rosalie," she murmured, her voice a lifeline in the storm of delirium. "Mama's here. I'm right here." Benjamin heard her use the word "Mama," and in that moment he felt no sting of betrayal to his late wife's memory, only a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude for the woman fighting for his daughter. He came to stand behind her, placing his hands on her tired shoulders in a gesture of pure support. "Let me help," he said. "Just stay," she whispered. "Just be here with us." They stood together through the longest hours of the night, a makeshift family forged in fear. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, the storm outside finally died down. At the same moment, Amelia felt a change. Rosalie's small body, damp with sweat, had finally cooled. The fever had broken. Amelia sagged with relief, and Benjamin's hands tightened, holding her up. He leaned down, his voice choked with emotion. "You did it." He breathed, his lips brushing her hair. "Amelia, you saved her." The blizzard was over, and with it the long, bitter storm inside Benjamin Thorne's heart had finally passed. As Rosalie recovered, a fragile peace settled over the ranch. It was deepened by Genevieve Croft's tearful confession. She admitted to Amelia that she had urged the foreman to place the advertisement, her own guilt turning to resentment when Amelia succeeded where she had failed. "You fought for her like a mother," she wept. Amelia, offering forgiveness, healed the last of the household's internal rifts. But the peace was shattered when the melting snow revealed a new threat. Henry Peterson rode in with grim news. Bart Corbin had finished his dam, diverting their creek and choking the life from the ranch. Enraged, Benjamin declared the time for patience was over and strode to get his rifle, intending to settle the matter with violence. Amelia ran to stop him. "This isn't about guns, it's about rights," she pleaded. "Give me 1 hour." Reluctantly, he agreed. Amelia raced to Sarah's old trunk, recalling an oilcloth parcel tucked at the bottom. Inside were the ranch's original founding documents. Her eyes flew across the old script until she found it a legal clause granting the Thorne property primary and unimpeded riparian rights to all water from the tributary. It was the proof they needed. She presented the document to Benjamin. He stared at the territorial governor's seal, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across his face. This was a weapon far more powerful than any gun. Henry saddled 3 horses he commanded, his voice filled with a new profound respect. "Miss Hayes, you're riding with us." The ride to Bart Corbin's ranch was quiet and determined. When they arrived, Corbin met them with a sneer, his men flanking him, expecting a fight. "Come to beg for water, Thorne," he taunted. Benjamin simply dismounted and unfurled the old deed on the porch railing. "This paper says otherwise." Corbin scoffed, but his confidence vanished when Sheriff Higgins, who had been summoned, rode into the yard. Forced to act, the sheriff examined the governor's seal and the clear legal language. "This is the highest law in the territory, Corbin," he declared grimly. "The deed is ironclad. You have 24 hours to dismantle that dam." Defeated not by bullets, but by a truth Amelia had unearthed, Corbin could only curse his loss. The ride home was triumphant. That evening on the porch as the sun set, Benjamin took Amelia's hands. "The month is almost up," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want a governess. I was a blind, grieving fool, so afraid to betray a memory that I almost lost my future. You healed my daughter, this ranch, and me." He dropped to one knee, his stormy eyes full of a new, certain love. "I'm asking you to be my wife, Amelia, my partner, be Rosalie's mother for all time. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy streamed down Amelia's face as she gave the only answer her heart could give. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Benjamin, yes." He rose to kiss her, a promise of a bright future. Just then, Rosalie ran from the house, throwing her arms around them, both her laughter filling the air. The house behind them was no longer a shrine to a ghost, but a home, and they were at last a family. Amelia's journey was more than just a trip across the country. It was a journey to discover her own strength and worth. She arrived a woman who believed she was unwanted, only to find that she was the one person who could heal a broken family and save a home from ruin. Her quiet courage, her hidden knowledge, and her unwavering compassion proved that a person's value isn't in who they can replace, but in the unique light they bring into the world. Benjamin and Rosalie didn't just get a new wife and mother. They were given a second chance at happiness, a chance to build a new family on a foundation of love and mutual respect. If this story of resilience, love, and unexpected courage in the Old West touched your heart, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share it with someone who loves a story of hope against all odds. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale from the annals of history. Thank you for listening.